The rain had been falling over New York City since early morning. People hurried across the sidewalks with umbrellas, coffee cups, and busy expressions. Nobody paid attention to an old woman slowly walking toward a large bank on Madison Avenue. She looked to be around 75 years old. Her blue coat was old and slightly faded. Her shoes were worn out, and she carried a small brown handbag that looked as if it had been repaired several times. To most people, she looked very poor, but there was something unusual about her. Despite her age and simple appearance, she walked with dignity. Her back was straight, and her eyes carried a quiet confidence that years of hardship had not managed to break. Her name was Margaret Ellis. Today was an important day. She had come to the bank to access an account that she had not touched for many years. As she climbed the marble steps, she stopped for a moment. She looked at the bank's name. A soft smile appeared on her face. Robert, she whispered. I finally came. Then she pushed open the glass doors. Inside, the bank was crowded. People in expensive suits waited in line. Business owners discussed investments. A television screen displayed financial news. The moment Margaret entered, several people looked at her. Then they looked away. A young security guard frowned. He wasn't rude, but he clearly wondered why an elderly woman dressed so simply had entered one of the city's most prestigious banks. Margaret slowly approached the information desk. A young employee named Jessica looked up. Can I help you? Margaret smiled. Yes, dear. I would like to access an account. Jessica nodded. Certainly. May I have your account number? Margaret opened her handbag and carefully removed a folded piece of paper. The paper looked old. Very old. Jessica glanced at it. Then she frowned. This account number. She typed on her computer. A few seconds later, her eyebrows rose. She looked at the screen, then at Margaret, then back at the screen. Something seemed strange. One moment. Ma'am, she called another employee. A young banker named Eric approached. What is it? Jessica pointed at the computer. Eric looked. Then he smiled slightly. Not a kind smile. One of those smiles people make when they believe someone has made a mistake. He looked at Margaret. Ma'am, are you sure this is your account? Margaret nodded. Double quotes. Yes. When was the last time you accessed it? She thought for a moment. About 25 years ago. Eric blinked. Then he laughed. Softly. 20-5 years. He looked at Jessica. She tried not to laugh. Several nearby employees overheard the conversation. One of them smirked. Eric folded his arms. Ma'am, accounts don't just sit untouched for 25 years. Margaret, remain calm. My husband asked me not to touch it until today. Another employee chuckled. Your husband planned something 25 years in advance? A few people nearby laughed. Margaret didn't react. She simply held her handbag. She had heard laughter before. Life had taught her patience. Eric sighed. Ma'am, do you have identification? Of course. She handed him her identification card. He examined it. Everything matched. Still, he seemed unconvinced. He tapped again. Then suddenly his expression changed. He looked at the screen for several seconds. His eyes widened. Jessica noticed. What happened? He quickly minimized the screen. Nothing, but something had definitely happened. The account existed, and the amount displayed on the screen was enormous. He stared at Margaret. This old woman. Impossible. She didn't look wealthy. She looked like someone who needed financial assistance. There had to be some error. He cleared his throat. Please, wait here. He walked quickly toward the manager's office. Margaret sat quietly on a chair. Several people continued glancing at her. Two employees whispered, I bet she thinks she has money in there. Probably $10. They laughed. Margaret simply looked out the window. The rain continued falling. And suddenly, she remembered another rainy day. 20-5 years earlier, her husband, Robert, had been sitting beside her in a small apartment. He had held her hand. Margaret, promise me something. What is it? No matter what happens, don't touch this account until June 17th. She had smiled. That's a long time. I know. Why? He looked at her with loving eyes. Because one day, someone will need it. She had laughed. Who? Robert had smiled. You'll know. 3 months later, Robert passed away from a heart condition. And since that day, Margaret had kept her promise. For 25 years, she worked as a school librarian. She lived simply. She repaired old clothes instead of buying new ones. She never spent money unnecessarily, and She never touched the account because a promise is a promise. Back in the present, the manager's office door opened. A middle-aged man named Daniel rushed outside. He looked nervous, very nervous. He approached Margaret. Mrs. Ellis? She stood. Yes. He forced a smile. Would you please come with me? The bank employees looked surprised. Managers usually didn't personally meet customers like her. Margaret followed him. Inside his office, Daniel offered her a seat. Would you like tea? She smiled. No, thank you. He swallowed. Mrs. Ellis, may I ask where you got this account? My husband opened it. When? About 30 years ago. Daniel's hands trembled slightly. He looked at the computer again. The account was absolutely real. Not only that, it contained several investments that had grown over decades. The amount was extraordinary. Far beyond what anyone expected. He looked at Margaret. This woman was quietly sitting in front of him, wearing a coat with a missing button. He could hardly believe it. She looked around the office. Young man, is something wrong? He quickly shook his head. No, ma'am. She smiled kindly. My husband always said money can make people nervous. Daniel almost laughed. At that moment, there was a knock. Eric entered. Sir. Daniel looked at him. You may leave. But sir, now. Eric left. Daniel sighed. Then he looked at Margaret. What exactly would you like to do with this account? She opened her handbag again. This time she removed an old envelope. The paper was yellow with age. She handed it to him. My husband left instructions. Daniel carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. He began reading. As he read, his expression changed. Then changed again. Finally, he looked completely stunned. Margaret smiled. What did Robert say? Daniel looked at her. The letter was unlike anything he had ever seen. At the bottom of the page was one final sentence. On June 17th, my wife will come to this bank. Please help her. And if a man named Keanu Reeves happens to appear that day, tell him I kept my promise to. Daniel blinked. He read it again. Then again. Keanu Reeves? The famous actor? What did that have to do with this account? He looked up. Double quotes. Mrs. Ellis. Did your husband know? She shook her head. I don't know. Daniel stared at the letter. The entire situation was becoming stranger. At that exact moment, the glass doors of the bank opened. A man wearing a black jacket entered quietly. His baseball cap was pulled low. He carried a cup of coffee. Nobody paid much attention to him. At first. Then one employee looked. Twice. Her eyes widened. She whispered, "Oh my goodness." Another employee turned. Then another. Within seconds, people began murmuring because the man standing near the entrance was none other than Keanu Reeves. He smiled politely. Good morning. Several people froze. The security guard nearly dropped his clipboard. Jessica covered her mouth. Eric's jaw fell open. Why would Keanu Reeves be in their bank? And why on this exact day? Inside the office, Daniel suddenly heard the commotion. He looked toward the glass wall. Then his eyes became huge. He looked at Keanu. Then at the letter. Then back at Keanu. His face turned pale. Because according to the letter, the impossible had just happened. For several seconds, nobody in the bank moved. The sound of rain tapping against the windows was the only thing anyone could hear. Then whispers spread across the lobby. It's really him. That's Keanu Reeves. What is he doing here? The employees, who had been laughing at Margaret only minutes earlier, now looked excited. Some straightened their clothes. Others tried to fix their hair. But Keanu Reeves seemed completely unaware of the attention. He simply smiled politely and walked toward the reception desk. Good morning, he said warmly. Jessica nearly forgot how to speak. Gee, good morning. Mr. Reeves, could you help me with something? Of course. Her voice was much louder than before. She immediately stood up. What can we do for you? Keanu took a folded piece of paper from his jacket. I need to verify a donation account that was established many years ago. Daniel, the manager, heard those words from his office. His heart nearly stopped. A donation account many years ago? He looked at Margaret. She looked equally surprised. Daniel carefully held the letter in his hands. There had to be a connection. There simply had to be. He quickly stepped out of his office. Mr. Reeves. Keanu turned. Yes, I'm Daniel, the branch manager. They shook hands. It's an honor to meet you, Daniel said. Keanu smiled. Thank you. Daniel looked nervous. Sir, would you mind coming to my office? I think there may be something you need to see. Keanu looked confused. Of course. As they walked, the employees stared. Eric suddenly felt uneasy. He remembered laughing at Margaret only moments earlier. Now the manager looked nervous, very nervous. Something important was happening inside the office. Margaret slowly stood up. The moment Keanu entered, he noticed her. An elderly woman in a faded blue coat. Their eyes met. For some reason, Keanu felt a strange sense of familiarity. He couldn't explain it. He smiled kindly. Good morning, ma'am. Margaret smiled back. Good morning. Daniel closed the door. Then he took a deep breath. Mr. Reeves, this may sound unbelievable. Keanu laughed softly. My life has taught me that unbelievable things happen. Daniel handed him the letter. Please read the last paragraph. Keanu accepted it. As he read, his expression slowly changed. Then he became completely still. He read the sentence again. If a man named Keanu Reeves happens to appear that day, tell him I kept my promise to. Silence filled the room. Finally, Keanu looked up. What is this? Margaret spoke softly. My husband wrote it 25 years ago. 25 years ago? She nodded. I haven't touched this account since then. Keanu looked at her. I don't understand. Neither did Daniel. Margaret sat down. She looked out the window. I don't understand either. Then she smiled. Sadly, but my husband was a very unusual man. Keanu sat across from her. Tell me about him. Margaret's eyes softened. His name was Robert Ellis. The moment she said the name, something flickered inside Keanu's memory. Robert Ellis. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. He frowned. Wait. He looked away, thinking. Then suddenly, his eyes widened. He remembered. 20-7 years earlier, long before he became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, long before fame. Long before success, he had been a struggling young actor in New York. He had little money. Very little. One winter evening, he had been walking through Manhattan after a failed audition. He had not eaten all day. His wallet was almost empty. The cold wind had been unbearable. Then an older man had stopped him. Young man. Keanu had looked up. The stranger had smiled kindly. You look hungry. Keanu had laughed awkwardly. I'll survive. But the man had insisted. He had taken Keanu into a small diner, ordered him a meal. And spent nearly 2 hours talking with him. The man had spoken about dreams, about kindness. About never giving up. Before leaving, he had handed Keanu $50. At first, Keanu refused, but the man had smiled. Take it. I can't. One day you'll help someone else. Keanu had accepted. Then he had asked the stranger's name. The man had smiled. Robert. Just Robert. Nothing more. But before leaving, Robert had said something strange. You have kind eyes. Never let success change them. Years later, Keanu still remembered those words, because they had come at one of the lowest moments of his life. He slowly looked at Margaret. Then at the letter. Then back at her. Your husband's name was Robert Ellis? Yes. Keanu's voice became quiet. Did he once work at a bookstore? Margaret blinked. Yes. Did he wear old brown jackets? All the time. Did he love strawberry pie? Margaret's eyes widened. That was his favorite dessert. Silence. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. She looked at him. You knew Robert? Keanu swallowed hard. I think your husband bought me dinner one night. Margaret covered her mouth. Oh my. Daniel looked from one person to the other in complete disbelief. This could not be coincidence. It simply could not. Margaret's hands trembled. She slowly opened her handbag. From inside, she removed an old photograph. It showed a smiling man wearing a brown jacket. Keanu stared at it. His eyes became wet. It was him. Robert. The man from the diner. The man who had shown kindness to a struggling young actor. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Margaret whispered, He remembered you. Keanu nodded slowly. I remembered him too. Tears rolled down Margaret's face. For 25 years she had followed her husband's instructions without understanding why. Now, suddenly, everything seemed connected. Daniel sat down. This is incredible. Margaret smiled sadly. My husband always believed kindness traveled in circles. Keanu looked at the photograph. He was right. She wiped her eyes. You know, after he came home that night, he told me about a young man. Keanu looked up. He said he met someone special. Special? He said the young man looked tired and worried, but there was goodness in his eyes. Keanu became quiet. Margaret continued. He told me, one day the young man will make the world smile. I don't know how, but I believe it. Keanu looked away, his eyes filled with emotion. Because back then, nobody believed in him. He was an unknown actor. He had failed audition after audition. He had doubted himself. Yet somehow, a stranger had seen something in him. Margaret smiled. He never forgot you, Keanu whispered. I never forgot him either. Suddenly, Daniel remembered something. The account. Everyone looked at him. He turned the computer screen. Mrs. Ellis, your husband didn't only save money. He clicked several files. He created a trust. Margaret looked confused. A trust? Daniel nodded. Double quotes, yes. He opened the documents. Then his eyes widened again, because he had missed an important page earlier. He read it carefully. Then he looked stunned. What is it? Keanu asked. Daniel swallowed. The trust has instructions. Margaret leaned forward. What instructions? He read aloud. If my wife keeps her promise, and if the young man named Keanu Reeves appears on the appointed day, then the entire trust shall be activated. Single quote silence. Daniel continued reading. The funds are to be used for one purpose only, to help elderly people who have no family, no support, and no place to call home. Margaret gasped. Keanu looked speechless. Daniel kept reading. I know what loneliness feels like. I know what hunger feels like. If kindness has any value, then let this money become shelter for those who are forgotten. Margaret began crying. She covered her face. This was exactly who Robert had been. A man who always thought of others. Daniel looked at the final paragraph. Then his hands started shaking. Mrs. Ellis. Yes, the amount in this trust. He paused. After 25 years of investments and growth, he looked at both of them. It is worth over $40 million. Double quote silence. Absolute silence. Margaret stared at him. $40 million? She could hardly breathe. For 25 years she had lived simply, worked quietly, repaired her own clothes, skipped vacations. And all this time, there had been $40 million waiting to change lives. Tears streamed down her face. Keanu looked equally emotional. $40 million, all intended to help lonely, elderly people, the same kind of people society often ignored. People just like Margaret herself. Daniel smiled softly. Mrs. Ellis, your husband was extraordinary. She nodded through tears. Yes. Then she looked at Keanu. So, are you? He shook his head. No. She smiled. You remembered a stranger's kindness after 27 years. He looked down. She gently held his hand. Robert was right. Success never changed your eyes. Keanu's eyes became wet. At that moment, there was another knock. Eric entered. He looked nervous. Sir, people outside are asking for photos with Mr. Reeves. Nobody answered. Because the atmosphere inside the room had completely changed. Eric noticed Margaret's tears. Then he noticed the photograph. Then the documents. He sensed something important had happened. And suddenly, he remembered how he had laughed at her. How he had doubted her. How he had judged her because of her old coat. Shame washed over him. He looked down. For the first time that day, he could not meet Margaret's eyes. And he had no idea that, within the next few hours, something would happen in this bank that none of them would ever forget. The manager's office was silent. Rain continued to fall outside, but inside the room, it felt as if time had stopped. Margaret still held the old photograph of her husband. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at Robert's smiling face. Keanu sat beside her, unable to take his eyes off the picture. 27 years. He had never forgotten the man who bought him dinner when he had almost given up on his dreams. And now, somehow, he was sitting beside Robert's widow. The connection felt impossible, yet it was real. Finally, Margaret spoke. Robert always said that kindness never disappears. He believed every good deed eventually finds its way home. Keanu smiled softly. I think he was right. At that moment, Eric, the young bank employee, still stood near the door. He looked uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. For the first time all day, he saw Margaret differently, not as a poor old woman, not as someone who didn't belong. He saw a woman who had kept a promise for 25 years, a woman who had quietly carried the memory of her husband while expecting nothing in return. He lowered his head. Mrs. Ellis, She looked at him kindly. Yes, dear. He swallowed hard. I owe you an apology. The room became quiet. Eric's voice trembled. When you first walked in, I judged you. He looked at the floor. I laughed. I made assumptions. I thought I knew who you were because of your clothes. Tears filled his eyes, but I was wrong. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a warm, gentle smile. Young man, we all make mistakes. He looked up. You forgive me? She nodded. Of course. He looked stunned. She continued. My husband taught me something many years ago. What was it? She smiled. He said people carry invisible stories. We never know what someone has survived. The words hit everyone in the room. Daniel looked away. Jessica lowered her eyes. Even Keanu became emotional, because it was true. The old woman in the blue coat carried a story nobody had imagined. A story of love, of loss, of promises, of patience. Margaret stood up slowly. Then she looked at Eric. Would you like to know a secret? He nodded. She smiled. I kept this old coat because Robert gave it to me on our first anniversary. Everyone became silent. She gently touched the fabric. It isn't expensive. It's actually very old. But every time I wear it, I remember his smile. Tears formed in Jessica's eyes. The coat they had silently mocked was a memory of love. Margaret looked around the office. So you see, dear, some things are worth more than money. Nobody spoke. Keanu's eyes became wet. He suddenly remembered the old brown jacket Robert had worn in the diner. Perhaps that jacket had also held memories. Perhaps it had once belonged to someone he loved. Perhaps that was why Robert had kept wearing it. The manager cleared his throat. Mrs. Ellis, according to your husband's instructions, we can activate the trust immediately. She looked at him, and then you will become the official director of the foundation. She looked surprised. Me? Yes. She smiled softly. I'm 75 years old. Keanu suddenly spoke. And you're perfect for it. Everyone looked at him. He smiled. Who better to help lonely elderly people than someone who understands them? Margaret looked at him quietly. Then tears filled her eyes. For so many years, society had made her feel invisible. Old age had slowly turned her into someone people ignored. But now someone believed she still had something valuable to give. She smiled. Then I accept. Daniel smiled. Wonderful. He extended his hand. She shook it. At that exact moment, something happened outside. A commotion filled the lobby. Daniel frowned. What now? An employee rushed into the office. Sir, what is it? There are reporters outside. Everyone looked surprised. Reporters? The employee nodded. They heard that Keanu Reeves is here. Keanu laughed softly. I should have worn a different jacket. Everyone smiled. But then Margaret looked worried. I don't want attention. Keanu understood immediately. He had spent years living under public attention. He knew how uncomfortable it could be. He smiled gently. Don't worry. But there are cameras. I'll handle it. Daniel looked relieved. A few minutes later, they walked into the lobby. The moment reporters saw Keanu, camera flashes exploded. Questions flew everywhere. Mr. Reeves, why are you here? Are you opening a new project? Are you making a donation? Keanu raised his hand politely. Everyone became quiet. Then he did something nobody expected. He stepped aside and pointed toward Margaret. The cameras turned. The old woman looked startled. Keanu smiled. You're asking the wrong person questions. The reporters looked confused. He continued, the most important person in this building today is not me. He looked at Margaret. It's her. The entire bank became silent. Keanu spoke slowly. This woman kept a promise for 25 years. Everyone listened. She lived simply. She never asked for attention. She never demanded recognition. He smiled. But today, because of her kindness and her husband's generosity, millions of dollars will help elderly people who have nowhere to go. Gasps filled the room. The reporter stared. Keanu continued, and I think people like her deserve to be celebrated. The cameras focused on Margaret. She looked overwhelmed. One reporter raised her hand. Mrs. Ellis, why did you wait 25 years? Margaret smiled softly. Because I love my husband. Silence. Another reporter asked, and why create a foundation for lonely elderly people? Margaret's eyes became emotional. Because no human being should feel forgotten. Even the reporters became quiet. Then another question came. What would you like people to remember from today? Margaret thought for a moment. Then she smiled. Please don't judge people by their clothes. Silence. She gently held her old blue coat. You never know what memories someone is carrying. A few reporters wiped their eyes. The message was simple, yet powerful. Then Keanu stepped forward again. I would also like to make an announcement. Everyone looked at him. He smiled. In honor of Robert Ellis and Margaret Ellis, I would like to personally contribute $5 million to the foundation. For a second, nobody moved. Then the entire room gasped. $5 million. Jessica covered her mouth. Daniel looked shocked. Even Margaret looked stunned. You don't have to do that, she whispered. Keanu smiled. I know. He looked at Robert's photograph. But a very kind man once bought a struggling young actor dinner. His voice became emotional. He saw hope in me when I couldn't see it myself. Tears filled his eyes. This is my chance to keep his kindness moving forward. Margaret began crying. She hugged him. The entire bank watched the moment. A simple old woman in a faded blue coat, and one of the world's most famous actors, united by a small act of kindness that had happened nearly 3 decades earlier. Camera flashes filled the room, but nobody cared about fame. Nobody cared about money. They cared about something much bigger. Human kindness. An hour later, the legal documents were completed. The foundation officially became the Robert and Margaret Ellis Foundation for Forgotten Seniors. Its mission was simple: build community homes for elderly people without families, provide food, health care, and companionship, create libraries and gardens where seniors could spend time together, ensure no elderly person felt abandoned. As the paperwork ended, Margaret looked out the window. The rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds. She smiled. Robert always loved sunshine after rain. Keanu stood beside her. I think he'd be happy today. She nodded. I think so too. Then she looked at him. Can I ask you something? Of course. Would you visit our foundation sometimes? He smiled. I'd be honored. She laughed softly. Then Robert's plan worked. Keanu looked confused. What plan? She reached into her handbag one final time. Then she removed another small note, a note she had never opened. On the front, it said, for Margaret, open only after the trust begins. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She read silently. Then she laughed through her tears. What does it say? Keanu asked. She handed him the note. He read, My dear Margaret, if you are reading this, then I was right. Kindness found its way home. And if the young man named Keanu Reeves is with you, please tell him I never doubted him for a second. Keanu became speechless. Below the message was one final sentence. Take care of each other. The world already has enough loneliness. Tears filled everyone's eyes. Margaret gently folded the note. Then she looked at the photograph. Well, Robert, you did it. Sunlight filled the office. And for a brief moment, it almost felt as if Robert himself were there, smiling. The old woman in the blue coat was no longer invisible. The employees who had mocked her would never forget this day. The reporters left with a story about kindness. The bank staff left with a lesson about judging appearances. And Keanu Reeves left with something priceless, proof that one small act of kindness can travel through decades and change countless lives. Because sometimes, the greatest fortunes are not measured in dollars. They are measured in promises kept, hearts touched, and kindness that refuses to die.